the forgotten rogue who walked into the Alpha King's court with a legion behind her. The wind swept across the jagged mountains surrounding the kingdom of Arindor, carrying with it the scent of pine, snow, and something darker, something that whispered of old betrayals. Beneath the gray clouds, the great palace of King Alaric rose like a crown of stone, its spires piercing the sky, glinting faintly with frost and sunlight. Inside, the court moved in perfect, silent rhythm. Courtiers bowed, servants scurried, and whispers filled the air like shadows that never quite settled. And yet, in all the grandeur, a storm was coming. One that would not bow, nor whisper, nor hide in the shadows. Lyra stood on the edge of the forest that bordered the kingdom, her cloak heavy with the damp chill of evening. She had been forgotten once, left to rot in the alleys of Arindor as a child, abandoned by those who should have protected her. But the years had changed her. She was no longer the small, hungry girl who had slipped through streets like a shadow. Now she carried the weight of armies, the cunning of rogues, and the secrets of those the world had rejected. Behind her, a legion waited in silence. Warriors, mages, and outcasts, all bound to her cause by loyalty, respect, and shared suffering. She drew a deep breath, feeling the power thrumming through her veins. The forest seemed to hold its breath with her. Tonight she would walk into the heart of the kingdom she had once loved and lost, into the court of the Alpha King who had once saved her life, and then cast her aside. Alaric sat in his throne room, his eyes fixed on the city beyond the palace walls. The morning's light had long faded, leaving the room bathed in shadow. He was a man of steel and fire, a king whose presence commanded loyalty and fear alike. Yet beneath the armor, beneath the cold authority, something fragile lingered. Guilt, perhaps, or a memory he could not silence. A name kept echoing in the quiet corners of his mind. Lyra. He had saved her once, a child with no name, no family, no place in the world. He had given her bread, shelter, and a chance. But fear had crept in, as it often did in the court, and he had let her go when jealousy and suspicion whispered in his ear. He had told himself it was necessary, that she would be safer away from the court. And yet, every time he thought of her, every time he walked the halls of his palace, he felt the hollow ache of absence. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the distant sound of hooves across stone roads. Alaric's heart tightened. Something was coming, and he knew it before the messenger arrived. The court, for all its finesse and order, could not hide the tremor that ran through it like a premonition. Lyra stepped onto the cobblestones, her boots silent, her eyes like flint. Behind her, the legion moved as one, their presence like a living shadow stretching across the land. Courtiers whispered as she approached, unsure whether to call for guards or to flee. Some remembered her as the daring, forgotten girl. Others knew nothing but the rumors, a phantom of the streets, a rogue who had risen from nothing to command fearsome power. Lyra did not pause. She walked straight to the gates, her gaze fixed on the palace. The massive doors loomed before her, carved with the faces of kings long dead, each one staring as if judging her worth. She did not flinch. Not now. Not ever again. A captain of the guard stepped forward, sword in hand, his eyes wary. "Who approaches?" he demanded. His voice carried authority, yet trembled ever so slightly. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice calm, yet carrying the weight of years. "And I come for what was taken from me." A stir ran through the guards. The name was familiar, fear mingled with uncertainty. The captain hesitated, looking to the palace for guidance. The courtiers gasped. Some had seen her as a child, slipping like a shadow through the halls. Some had only heard stories of her exploits, how she had gathered a legion of outcasts, how she had returned with power no one could ignore.
Inside the palace, Alaric rose slowly from his throne.
He had sensed her approach long before the words reached him. His jaw tightened, and for the first time in years he felt fear, not for himself, but for the kingdom he had built on loyalty, fear, and unspoken truths. "Let her enter," he commanded, his voice low, controlled. But in that simple sentence, a storm stirred, one of old regrets, of longing, and of the inevitable reckoning that had come to his doorstep. Lyra walked through the gates, her legion halting just outside, their presence a silent promise of power and protection. Every eye followed her. Every whisper stopped mid-air. She did not bow, she did not hesitate, and in that defiance, the court felt the tremor of a life once forgotten, now returned to claim what was owed. The throne room was vast and filled with shadows. Tapestries of past kings and queens hung like silent witnesses. Candles flickered, casting uneven light that danced along the walls, revealing dust and glory alike. Lyra stepped inside, and the room seemed to contract around her, as if the very air held its breath. Alaric stepped forward, his eyes meeting hers across the distance. The years had changed them both. He was taller, broader, the face of a man who had ruled through fire and blood. She had grown into someone equally formidable, a force not to be underestimated, and yet, beneath the surface, he saw her as she had once been, the girl he had saved, the girl he had failed. "Lyra," he said, and his voice was a mixture of awe, regret, and something he could not name. "You called my name once," she said softly, though the words carried across the silent room. "Do you remember why?" He began, but the words faltered. He did remember. The laughter of the streets, the hunger in her eyes, the spark of life he had tried to nurture. And the court had taken her from him, as if she were a piece of treasure too dangerous to keep. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "I have returned," she said, "not as the girl you cast aside, but as the force you cannot ignore." The court watched in silent fear and fascination. Her legion waited outside, silent but palpable. The threat was clear. She had power, she had knowledge, and she had every intention of reclaiming what was hers. Alaric's heart pounded. He had ruled with iron, yet he had never anticipated this, never imagined the child he had saved would return with fire in her eyes and a legion at her back. And yet, beneath his fear, something flickered, a recognition of what had been lost and perhaps what could be redeemed. Lyra stepped closer, her gaze fixed on him, not with hatred, but with something deeper, something that spoke of years of pain, of survival, and of the complex web of emotions that bound them together. "I come with an offer," she said. "The kingdom can be ours, together, or it can burn." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended in shadow. Alaric's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed caution, yet he could not look away. The court murmured, uneasy, sensing the tension between them, the pull of the past and the promise of a future fraught with peril. For a moment, silence ruled. Then a servant whispered nervously, "Her legion." Alaric's eyes flicked to the doors, imagining the mass of warriors, mages, and exiles waiting beyond. The scale of her return was more than anyone had anticipated. He realized that the child he had once saved was no longer a child. She was a queen of shadows, a rogue who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Lyra took another step closer. "You had a choice once," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. "You chose your throne over me. Now I offer you a choice again. Stand with me, or stand against me." The weight of her words pressed down on the room. Every noble, every soldier, every observer could feel the shift. This was no longer a girl seeking justice. This was a woman reclaiming her power, forcing the Alpha King himself to face the past he had tried to bury. Alaric's hand twitched near his sword. The court held its collective breath. For a moment, the king and the rogue stared at each other, two forces shaped by the same past, destined to collide. Then, without a word, Lyra turned slightly, allowing her cloak to fall back and reveal the sigil of her legion, a mark known to none but those loyal to her. The message was clear: she was not alone. She had returned, and she had power beyond imagination. Alaric swallowed hard. He had been a king of unchallenged authority, yet now he felt something he had not felt in years: uncertainty, and beneath that uncertainty, something even stronger, a spark that had never truly died. Lyra's eyes held his, unwavering. "Decide quickly," she said. "The night does not wait, and neither do I." The palace seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the wind howled like the ghosts of the past, carrying the promise of change, of reckoning, of fire and shadow. Alaric nodded slowly, though no words escaped him. In that simple gesture, Lyra understood. The game had begun. The rogue who had once been forgotten had returned, and the Alpha King would never be the same again. The doors of the throne room opened, letting in the chill of the night. Beyond them, the mass of her legion waited, silent, patient, and deadly. The court realized then that history was not just repeating, it was evolving, reshaping itself around a force they had never fully comprehended. Lyra stepped fully into the room, her eyes never leaving Alaric's. The past had returned, but the future was yet unwritten. And in that moment, both rogue and king knew that everything would change. The wind outside carried one last whisper, almost like a warning. Shadows, remember, and power always comes with a price. And so, the game began. The throne room was thick with silence, the kind that pressed against the ribs and made hearts beat faster. Courtiers dared not breathe too loudly, their eyes darting between the Alpha King, the rogue, and the empty shadows behind her that hinted at the waiting legion. Lyra's presence was more than a memory. It was a challenge, a storm crashing into the polished order of the court. Alaric's gaze did not waver. He had ruled with iron for years, crushing rebellions, enforcing loyalty, and commanding fear. Yet in the face of Lyra, all his carefully constructed authority felt fragile. The woman before him was not the child he had saved, nor the girl he had cast away. She was a force, sharp, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. "You have grown," he said finally, his voice calm but carrying the weight of unspoken questions. Lyra's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "And you have aged," she said, voice smooth but laced with meaning. "But some things never change." Her eyes pierced him, reminding him of long-forgotten promises, of laughter and shared secrets from years past. Alaric's jaw tightened. The court shifted nervously, sensing the tension between them, a tension that went beyond politics. Every whispered rumor of their shared past seemed to hover in the air, unspoken but alive. "You have brought a legion," he said, gesturing to the heavy doors beyond which shadows waited. "Do you intend war?" Lyra shook her head, the flicker of candlelight catching her hair. "No," she said. "I bring power, not destruction. I offer a choice, King Alaric. Stand with me or stand in the way of what is coming." The courtiers gasped softly, some whispering behind their hands. Alliances and rivalries shifted like sand. Some saw her as a savior, a woman who could restore honor and justice. Others saw a threat, someone who could topple everything the Alpha King had built. Alaric studied her carefully. He remembered her cleverness as a child, the way she had escaped every trap set for her, the way she had survived streets that would have crushed anyone else. And he realized that cleverness had grown into something sharper, more dangerous. "You have learned well," he said. "But the court does not bend for memories." Lyra tilted her head slightly. I do not ask for their obedience. I ask for yours." Her words were soft, but the weight behind them was like stone falling into the hall. The king felt it in his chest, the memory of trust given and betrayed, of bonds broken by fear. A sudden movement at the edge of the room caught Alaric's attention. One of Lyra's lieutenants, a tall, silent warrior cloaked in dark leather, stepped forward. In the flickering light, he looked more like a shadow than a man. The courtiers tensed, hands brushing swords, unsure whether the move was greeting or threat. Lyra's gaze softened for a moment. "Do not fear," she said, almost to herself. Then louder, to the court, "I have come not to fight the innocent. I have come to reclaim what was stolen, to restore balance where the court has failed." Some nodded in quiet agreement. Others whispered warnings of treachery. The tension was unbearable, each heartbeat echoing in the stone room like a drum of war. Alaric felt the pull of old memories. He remembered the girl who had once followed him through the alleys of Erindor, trusting him blindly. He had failed her then. He could not fail her again, not if he valued honor or himself.
"Your words are bold," he said slowly.
But boldness alone cannot command loyalty. "I do not need their loyalty," Lyra replied. "I need truth. And the truth is, this court has hidden from its own people, from itself, for too long. Secrets and betrayals have built your walls, but walls cannot save you from the shadows you ignore." The room seemed to hold its breath. The courtiers shifted nervously, realizing that the rogue's words carried weight they could not dismiss. Alaric, too, felt the edge of fear and respect. This was no longer a girl from the streets. This was a leader, a strategist, someone who had learned patience, cunning, and the art of survival in the harshest of places. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the balcony above, and the king's advisor, a thin man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "Your Highness," he said, voice quivering, "she cannot be trusted. She has returned with a force no one can predict. Let us remove her before she takes control." Alaric raised a hand. Silence returned. His eyes, dark and commanding, swept over the room. "No," he said. "We watch, we listen, and we act when necessary, but we do not strike blindly. She is not the same girl you knew, and neither am I." Lyra's eyes met his, and in that gaze, years of pain, longing, and unspoken words passed between them. She remembered the boy king who had saved her from the streets, the man who had given her hope, and the court that had crushed her. Alaric saw the rogue who had become a queen of shadows, a woman who carried both the innocence of the past and the sharpness of survival. "Then we speak," Lyra said, her voice steady. "Tell me why the kingdom trembles. Tell me what you fear. And tell me what we can do to set it right." Alaric took a slow breath. "I fear what lies beneath the surface of our kingdom," he said. "I fear the betrayals we have hidden, the curses that linger in silence, and I fear what happens when those we have wronged return to claim justice." Lyra's lips curved in a faint, almost sad smile. "Then you know why I am here." The room was tense, every noble listening, every soldier waiting. Even the air seemed heavier, filled with anticipation. Outside, the legion waited, silent, a living shadow stretching across the palace grounds. The kingdom itself seemed to shiver under the weight of what was to come. "Then we must act," Alaric said finally, "and we must do it together." His voice carried authority, but beneath it was hesitation. Could he truly trust her? Could he embrace the girl he had once saved, now a woman of power, strategy, and shadow? Lyra inclined her head. "We act together, then. But the kingdom will know change is coming. It cannot remain blind, even to itself." The king's advisor whispered to another courtier, worry evident in his eyes. "This cannot end well," he said quietly. "She is too dangerous." Alaric ignored him, his focus on Lyra. The past had returned, but it was not the past he remembered. It was a reckoning, a force that demanded attention, and the only way forward was through it, not around it. Lyra moved closer, her steps deliberate, each one carrying the weight of confidence and command. "We begin with truth," she said. "Secrets and lies have festered in the court long enough. Tell me what is hidden, and we can make this kingdom stronger." The nobles murmured among themselves. Some feared her audacity, some admired her courage, but none could deny the power she carried in her presence. Alaric's pulse quickened. The court, for all its wealth and influence, had never felt so fragile. Then, a sudden shadow moved at the edge of the throne room. A figure, cloaked and silent, slipped through a side door. Alaric's eyes narrowed. Lyra tensed. The courtiers froze. Every instinct told them danger had arrived. Before anyone could react, a silver dagger gleamed in the dim candlelight, aimed at one of Lyra's lieutenants. In an instant, Lyra's reflexes were sharper than the blade. She lunged, knocking the assailant back, but not before a flicker of steel nicked the leather of the warrior's arm. Alaric's sword was out in a heartbeat, his presence between rogue and attacker a blur of authority and instinct. The dagger clattered to the floor, and the figure fled, disappearing into the shadows of the palace. Breathless silence followed. Courtiers stared, unsure whether to intervene or hide. Alaric turned to Lyra, his expression unreadable. "This will not be simple," he said. "No," Lyra admitted, her eyes blazing. "It will never be simple, but it will be worth it." Her legion waited beyond the doors, a silent reminder of the storm that had arrived. Alaric felt the weight of the moment, the pull of history, and the tension of unspoken emotions. The girl he had saved, the woman who had returned, had changed everything. And yet beneath the fear, beneath the tension, a spark remained. One of hope, of trust, and of the possibility of redemption. Alaric nodded slowly. "Then we begin," he said, his voice steady. Together. Lyra's gaze softened, just slightly. "Together," she agreed. Outside, the wind carried whispers of what was to come. The court would tremble, secrets would be revealed, and loyalties would be tested. The rogue had returned, not just to challenge the king, but to change the kingdom itself. And in the quiet corners of the palace, the shadows seemed to lean closer, listening. The game had begun, and no one could predict who would stand when it ended. For the first time in years, Alaric felt the full weight of responsibility and of possibility. The rogue, the girl he had once saved, had returned, and nothing would ever be the same. The night was heavy over the palace of Arendor, thick with fog and the scent of pine carried from the mountains. In the gardens that overlooked the city, moonlight spilled across fountains and statues, turning stone faces into frozen watchers of the dark. Lyra moved quietly through the shadows, her cloak brushing against the marble paths. Behind her, a small group of her legion followed, silent as smoke, ready to act if danger appeared. She could feel it, the pull of secrets buried deep within the kingdom. The palace walls, so polished and grand, held more than tapestries and gold. They held whispers, betrayals, and curses long hidden from the eyes of the court. She had returned not just to reclaim her place, but to uncover the truths that could either save Arendor or destroy it. Alaric approached from the moonlit archway, silent and sure, as if the shadows themselves parted to let him pass. Even at night, his presence was commanding. Lyra turned, meeting his eyes. There was a tension between them, neither one willing to step fully closer, yet neither able to turn away.
"You should not have come alone,"
Alaric said softly, though his eyes scanned the darkened gardens, alert for any danger. "Even with your legion, the palace holds traps." "I am not alone," she said, "and I am no longer the child who could be caught unaware. I know how to move through shadows, King Alaric. You taught me well." He stiffened slightly at the reminder, though he said nothing. The past had returned in her words, uninvited, yet undeniable. He remembered the streets, the stolen bread, the small hands that had clutched his own as she followed him, trusting him completely. That trust had been broken once, and he feared breaking it again. But now, more than fear, he felt the pull of what could still be repaired. "Then we begin," he said after a pause, his voice low. "There is much to uncover. Secrets that the court will not willingly reveal, and curses that have lingered too long."
Lyra nodded.
Show me." Together they moved through the palace halls, passing tapestries that depicted kings of old, their eyes seeming to follow their every step. Candles flickered in sconces, shadows dancing across the walls. The court had grown silent, unsure whether to follow, spy, or flee. But Lyra's presence demanded attention. Even the most loyal servants felt the pull of her authority. In a hidden chamber beneath the palace, they found the first secret. A collection of scrolls, charred at the edges and covered in symbols that shimmered faintly in the candlelight, lay on a marble table. Alaric's fingers brushed one, hesitating. "These are old," he said, "from before my rule. They speak of curses placed upon the royal line, binding the kingdom to misfortune if certain wrongs are not corrected." Lyra's eyes scanned the symbols, recognizing shapes she had seen in her studies of forbidden texts. "These are tied to blood and loyalty," she said, "to the line of kings and to those who serve them. If we do not act, the curse will spread further, weakening the land, the people, and the hearts of those in power." Alaric looked at her, the weight of his responsibility pressing down. He had known of rumors, whispers of curses in the court, but he had dismissed them as superstition. Now, standing beside the rogue who had become more than legend, he could not deny the truth. "Then we act," he said, "but carefully. The court will resist, and the wrong allies could turn this into chaos." Lyra's gaze softened for a moment, and then sharpened. "We do not act alone. Your trust must extend beyond yourself, King Alaric." "And yours?" she said, turning slightly toward the shadows of her waiting legion. "Beyond even me." They worked through the night, deciphering scrolls, uncovering hidden rooms, and piecing together the fragments of curses that had silently held the kingdom in fear. As they moved, their conversations shifted from strategy to memories. Alaric spoke reluctantly of his doubts and mistakes, of the years when he had ruled with iron but had lost sight of justice. Lyra shared fragments of her own journey, the exile, the struggle for survival, and the gathering of a legion loyal not to crowns but to truth and honor. Each revelation drew them closer. It also exposed the tension between them. Trust, desire, and unspoken regrets hung in the air, like a charged storm. Lyra had once loved him as a child, an innocent, trusting love. And though years had changed both of them, something deeper lingered, unacknowledged, unspoken, yet undeniable. Suddenly a shadow moved across the chamber, and the temperature seemed to drop. Lyra instinctively reached for her dagger, while Alaric's hand moved to the hilt of his sword. A figure stepped forward, a court sorcerer, a man thought loyal, now revealed as a traitor in league with powers that sought to twist the curses for personal gain. "You should not have come here," the sorcerer said, his voice sharp and cruel. "The rogue thinks she can challenge fate itself, but some forces are older than her, and older than you, King Alaric." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Then you will see how old power can be met with new strength," she said. Her dagger gleamed in the candlelight, and behind her shadows shifted as her legion began to close in, silent and threatening. The sorcerer laughed, a dry, hollow sound, and raised his hands, summoning a wave of dark energy that surged toward them. Alaric acted first, his sword slicing through the air. breaking the spell before it could strike. Lyra darted forward, moving like a shadow herself, her dagger aimed with precision, disarming the sorcerer and forcing him to retreat. For a moment, the chamber was silent again. Candles flickered, smoke curling from the edges of the scrolls, and Lyra and Alaric stood close, breathing heavily. Their eyes met, and for a second, the world outside the chamber, the court, the palace, the kingdom, seemed to vanish. Only the two of them remained, bound by trust, history, and the unspoken tension that neither dared to name. "We cannot do this alone," Alaric said finally, voice low. "Even together, we need allies." Lyra nodded. "Then we gather them." From the court, from the shadows, from the corners of the kingdom where fear rules, every hidden truth, every wronged soul, we bring them to light. They emerged from the hidden chamber just as dawn broke over the mountains, casting golden light across the city and palace. The court was awakening, and whispers of the rogue's return had already spread. Some nobles shivered at her name, while others looked with hope at the possibility of a kingdom restored. Alaric and Lyra moved to the balcony overlooking the city. Below, Arendar stirred. The people did not yet know the changes coming, nor the battles they would face. But Lyra could feel the pulse of the kingdom, the tension in the air, and the threads of fate shifting toward a reckoning. "You were right to come," Alaric said quietly, almost to himself. "The kingdom needs this. Needs you." "And yet it is still a dangerous game," she said. "Power, curses, and old betrayals do not yield easily. One misstep, and everything falls." Alaric nodded. "Then we do not step alone. Not anymore." Their hands brushed a fleeting touch, but the weight of it lingered. Both knew what it meant. Trust, unspoken longing, and a bond forged not by comfort, but by fire, shadow, and survival. The peace was short-lived. A distant cry echoed from the palace gates. Lyra's legion was under attack. An ambush, orchestrated by forces who had watched her return and feared what she represented. Without hesitation, she sprinted toward the sound, Alaric at her side. The courtyard erupted in chaos. Courtiers screamed and ran as shadowy figures clashed with soldiers and warriors. Lyra moved like a tempest, precise and deadly, her legion answering her silently, striking with efficiency. Alaric fought beside her, his sword a blur, defending her against those who had underestimated the rogue who had once been forgotten. A powerful figure emerged. A warlock, shrouded in dark robes, wielding magic that twisted the air and ground beneath their feet. Lyra met his gaze, recognizing the same power that had struck at her legion in the past. "You will not take this kingdom," she said firmly, stepping forward, her dagger in hand. The warlock laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. "The kingdom has already chosen its fate," he said. "And you, rogue, are merely a piece in a game older than you can imagine." Lyra's eyes flared with determination. "Then I will change the rules." The first strike came, a surge of dark energy aimed at her heart. Alaric dove between her and the spell, taking the force against himself. Pain lanced through his side, but he stayed on his feet, gripping his sword tightly. Lyra's legion surged forward, forming a wall, protecting her while she prepared her counterattack. Time slowed. The rogue and the king, side by side, facing a power neither had fully understood, yet bound by the unspoken truth that their destinies were intertwined. Each strike, each movement, each glance carried meaning beyond the battle. Trust, tension, unspoken longing, and the knowledge that only together could they survive. And then, with a cry, Lyra unleashed a counterstrike that shattered the warlock's spell, forcing him to retreat into the shadows from which he came. The courtyard fell silent again, broken only by the distant cries of the wounded and the heavy breathing of warriors. Lyra lowered her dagger, chest heaving, and looked at Alaric. Blood trickled down his side, yet he remained standing, eyes locked on hers. Neither spoke at first, the weight of the moment pressing down. Finally, she whispered, "We survive, but this is only the beginning." "I know." Outside the courtyard, the first rays of the sun pierced the fog, illuminating the palace and the city below. The kingdom had witnessed the rogue's return, and now it had felt the storm that came with her presence. Lyra's eyes swept over her legion, over the palace, and finally back to Alaric. "The court will not wait for us to recover," she said. "Allies must be found, secrets revealed, and curses broken. The kingdom is fragile, and so are the hearts within it." Alaric met her gaze, his hand brushing hers briefly. A silent promise, a shared acknowledgement of the path ahead. "Then we face it together," he said. Lyra nodded, the shadows of the past and the light of the future mingling in her expression. "Together," she agreed. But far beyond the palace, in the forests and mountains, other forces watched. Powers older and darker than the court itself stirred, sensing the rogue's return. The game was far from over. The kingdom would tremble, loyalties would shift, and the bond between rogue and king would be tested beyond imagination. And in the heart of the palace, Lyra and Alaric knew it. This night had changed everything. The rogue who had once been forgotten had returned. The Alpha King had been reminded of the past he could not undo, and together they were poised to face shadows no one else could comprehend. Dawn broke over Arendor, spilling golden light across a kingdom still trembling from the night's chaos. The palace, once silent and tense, now hummed with the cautious stirrings of preparation. Soldiers repaired walls, messengers ran through halls, and Lyra's legion moved with disciplined purpose, securing every corner, every shadow. The rogue had returned, and now she was not alone. Alaric stood at the balcony, the first rays of sun highlighting the strong lines of his face. He was tired, his side still tender from the previous night's ambush, but he had not faltered, not when the kingdom itself teetered on the edge of ruin, not when Lyra, the girl he had once saved, the woman who had returned with a force no one could deny, stood beside him. Lyra appeared at his side, silent as a shadow, yet radiant in purpose. Her cloak brushed the stone, and her eyes scanned the city below. She had seen the unrest, the fear, and the hope stirring among the people. They looked to her as much as they looked to the king, and she had no intention of failing them. "The court is divided," Alaric said, voice low. "Some see your return as salvation. Others see it as a threat." Lyra nodded. "Then we must act swiftly. Allies must be won, curses must be broken, and the traitors who linger in shadow must be exposed." He looked at her, the weight of their shared history pressing down. "Do you trust me?" he asked, almost in a whisper. She met his gaze steadily. "I do," she said. "But trust is not enough. We must act, or the kingdom will fall before we can save it." Their plan was simple, yet dangerous. They would divide the court's factions, expose conspiracies, and reclaim the magical artifacts that had been used to bind the kingdom with silent curses. Lyra's legion would secure the palace grounds, while Alaric and she would confront the sorcerers and traitors directly. Every step carried risk. Every decision demanded precision. By mid-morning, they moved through the palace corridors, their footsteps echoing off stone. Courtiers whispered and watched, some with fear, others with awe. The rogue and the king, side by side, projected authority that none could ignore. Lyra's dagger glinted in the sunlit halls, a reminder that the forgotten had returned, with power, patience, and purpose. Their first confrontation came in the Hall of Ancestors, a chamber lined with statues of kings and queens past. Shadows flickered along the walls as the last loyal traitors emerged, their faces twisted with greed and anger. "You think you can undo what has been done?" one of them demanded, a mage whose knowledge of curses rivaled Alaric's. "The kingdom belongs to power, not to rogues or kings. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. The kingdom belongs to its people, to truth, and to those who fight for justice. You have ruled with fear and secrecy for too long.
That ends today. A battle of strategy and skill erupted.
Lyra moved like water, precise and swift, her legions striking in perfect unison. Alaric fought with the authority of a king, his sword slicing through dark magic, his shield guarding those he swore to protect. Together, they were unstoppable, a combination of experience, instinct, and unspoken trust. During the fight, a surge of dark magic struck Lyra, threatening to pull her into shadow. Alaric dove beside her, blocking the attack and taking the brunt of its force. Pain lanced through him, but he stayed on his feet, a wall between the rogue and the darkness. Lyra's eyes met his, a mix of gratitude, fear, and something more, something neither dared to name aloud. The battle raged through the palace, echoing down halls and chambers. Courtiers and soldiers alike watched as the rogue and the king fought together, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as allies bound by shared purpose and mutual respect. Every move, every glance, every strike carried meaning beyond survival. It carried the weight of history, redemption, and a bond that neither had expected to endure. Finally, the last traitor fell, and the magical artifacts that had bound the kingdom's fate were reclaimed. Lyra's hands glowed faintly as she touched them, undoing the curses that had lingered for generations. The palace seemed to breathe again, walls solidifying, shadows retreating, and sunlight filling every chamber. Alaric moved to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It is done," he said softly. Lyra shook her head, exhaustion lining her features, but a rare smile touched her lips. "For now," she said, "the kingdom is free from this threat, but the people must see that trust, courage, and truth are stronger than fear and secrecy. That work is just beginning." Together they walked to the balcony overlooking the city. The people below had gathered, curious and hopeful, sensing the change in the palace, sensing the return of a force that had been forgotten but was now unstoppable. Lyra raised her hand slightly, acknowledging the citizens. Alaric stood beside her, his eyes steady, reflecting pride, respect, and something deeper for the rogue who had returned from shadows to reclaim her place. "Your place is no longer hidden," he said, voice soft. "You are not forgotten anymore." Lyra turned to him, her gaze intense. "And neither are you," she said. "The man who saved me once, and the king who has learned to stand with truth, both are part of what makes this kingdom strong." The kingdom had been tested, the past had been reconciled, and the rogue who had been forgotten was now a force of balance and hope. Yet even as peace settled, he sensed the subtle tension in the air. Darkness had not vanished entirely. Other forces, older and deeper than the palace itself, watched, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Rest will come," Lyra said, reading his thoughts. "But we cannot linger too long. There are still shadows to confront, alliances to strengthen, and hearts to heal." Alaric nodded, his hand brushing hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement of trust, respect, and the bond forged in battle and shadow. "Then we face it together," he said. The people cheered from the streets below, their voices carrying hope, reverence, and the realization that a kingdom could rise stronger from the ashes of fear. Lyra's legions stood nearby, silent, vigilant, yet proud of the woman they had followed through darkness and shadow. Inside the palace, the courtiers slowly began to understand that power alone did not define leadership. Truth, courage, and loyalty now shaped the court, and the rogue who had once been forgotten was at its center, not as a threat, not as a shadow, but as a guiding force. That evening, in the quiet of the royal gardens, Alaric and Lyra walked among fountains and statues. The moonlight glimmered off the water, reflecting their intertwined paths. Both knew that the journey had changed them. The rogue who had walked into the court with a legion behind her had not only reclaimed her place, but had transformed the king, the palace, and perhaps the very soul of the kingdom. "You saved me once," Lyra said softly, looking at him, "not from the streets, but from myself. From doubt, from fear, from forgetting who I could be." Alaric's hand found hers, "And you reminded me what it means to lead with courage and heart. The rogue I once knew, the woman I see now. You are stronger than any throne." Their eyes met, and in that quiet moment, the years of pain, longing, and unspoken words found a fragile peace. Not all wounds were healed, and not all shadows had fled. But together, they had faced the impossible. Together, they had reclaimed the kingdom and themselves. From the hills beyond the city, a faint shadow stirred, a whisper of power that had not yet been revealed. The kingdom had been saved, but forces older than memory waited. The rogue and the king, bound by destiny and choice, would face them when the time came. For now, the palace was alive with light, hope, and a sense of rebirth. The rogue who had once been forgotten walked proudly beside the Alpha King, her legion loyal and steadfast, the people watching with awe. The kingdom had witnessed a transformation, not through fear, not through power alone, but through courage, truth, and the bonds forged in shadow and battle. Lyra looked at Alaric one last time as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "The kingdom is safe, for now," she said. "But we must be ready for whatever comes next." Alaric nodded, squeezing her hand.
We will face it together?
"Always." And in that moment, the rogue who had been forgotten, the king who had learned humility and trust, and the kingdom that had survived the storms of shadow and betrayal, all shared the quiet knowledge of what had been won. Not only a throne reclaimed, not only curses undone, but the bond between two souls who had weathered darkness and emerged stronger, united, and ready for the future. The moon rose over Erendor, casting silver light across a kingdom at peace, for now. The rogue's legion stood tall, the courtiers watched in awe, and the citizens whispered tales of the woman who had returned from shadows to reclaim her place. Lyra's name would never again be forgotten. And even as the night settled, a faint wind carried a whisper through the mountains. The kingdom had been saved, but the world beyond still held shadows, waiting, watching. But for Lyra and Alaric, for the kingdom they now led together, hope had returned. And with hope came the promise of a new dawn.